Perhaps we're straggling back from lunch, but we want to get started and stay on track. I think my job is to get us started and then get out of the way. So I'm going to turn things over to Todd Palmer and Jingjing Zhu. You guys can introduce yourselves and just segue right into the presentation.
My name is Todd, and your name is?
Jingjing.
Hey, you got it right there. Doesn't get much better than that. Guys, it is 2022. You know what I'm doing right now? I'm buying a car because you cannot find a car in this area. So my wife is lured down to the Chevrolet dealership, and we are going into debt, and I have no idea what the car looks like. I have no idea what the terms of the payment are. I called her up, she called me up, I said, what color is it? She said, I'll surprise you. I said, when do I retire? She says, I'll surprise you. So that's how we buy a car in 2022. Well, let's go back a year ago in 2021, and we're going to tell you a little story about why we ended up doing what we did. You may remember back in the old days, kids, back when you guys used to, back pre-COVID. Well, COVID hit about March 2020. She's keeping me on top of that. So we are basically, we sort of finished up that semester and so forth and came back. We created some concepts that we were going to be talking about in a few minutes. But then Jingjing then announced that because her unique immigration status, she needed to go to China. Unfortunately, because of COVID, she couldn't go to China during the summer. And she, with the kind of visa she had, requires her to have a certain amount of time spent in China. So we had to come up with solutions. So one day you came up to me and she said, Todd, I got to go to China and I got to spend several months in China. And I said, I will MacGyver it, because that's what I did. So we're going to talk about how we came up with a co-teaching model. And I'll use the term co-teaching as opposed to team teaching, because I got to say, this was one of my best ever educational experiments, was working with Jingjing that semester. It made me rethink how to teach. It made me rethink how you present. But it was definitely a very, very different experience. I enjoyed it a lot. Maybe she enjoyed it. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. We talked quite often.
We talked a lot. We talked a lot. I would say that semester or so, it was like, every day I had a nice conversation with Jingjing, and then I'd say hello to my wife. That was about it. But I had a lot of conversation with Jingjing. So without any further ado, I'm going to let Jingjing talk a little bit about co-teaching.
Okay, so we had this experience last spring. We'll give you a little bit of background on co-teaching. First definition, this could date it back actually to 1960s when this progressive education was favored. Progressive education emphasized experiential, hand-on experience, critical thinking. So during that process, those schools in K-12 and also their teacher training program saying that we should have this idea of co-teaching or team teaching or have multiple names like co-enrollment, collective teaching, cooperative teaching. So basically in practice, they had a lot of definitions. So basically they say the basic idea is 2 or more faculty members come together to produce a course. Then depending on the extent of their cooperation with each other and coordination involved, people have different ideas and different definitions. You can see those are two different definitions. Some say, okay, you need to have a collaborative relationship with the purpose of shared work. Then for the outcome of achieving what none could have done alone. The other may say, okay, just 2 professors come together, sharing the responsibility to give instruction to the same group of people. Actually, in reality, in the literature, you will see a lot more definitions with subtle difference, but we only list some of them here. So in this paper, we consider it's more like a continuing of a collaboration in this horizon. So you can see one is 2 professors teach their own block, then they're done. Basically, you don't need to closely collaborate with each other. Then the other extremes is you co-design a course, you instruct together, you solve student problems together, you want to reach a cohesive role in the end. So that's the highest level. A lot of coordination is maybe in between. Okay. So because this one is highly researched in K-12, this kind of setting. So in this friend and his colleagues in 2010 actually have had this design, the 6 models of co-teaching. So you can see the first one is one teach, one observe. It's basically for those junior like faculty in this or junior teachers in their school. So you can use this to train the teacher and also to guide their students differently. Then station teaching, you can see that's commonly used in our like elementary schools. My daughter like every day experience this kind of thing. So they will have several teaching, like teachers guide through those teaching stations. Parallel teaching, they may have one teacher responsible for part of the student group and the other be responsible for the other part. Alternative teaching, like they will have these 2 instructors. They will have, okay, I'm responsible for some part of this, then later you will be responsible, we're rotating together. Another one called teaming, maybe that's one more close to this higher education or what we have done in the past is like we're teaming together. So we actually guide the same group of students, but we co-design everything and we instruct them right together. The last one is more like one teach, one assist, like you invest maybe a guest speaker sometimes to your classroom. That's not a very normal arrangement. But this one is basically based on the models in the K-12 like student. Co-teaching in higher education in recent years, we do see some like test programs in different schools, like in Europe, in Canada, in US and other parts, but still it's not a very commonly used way like in our school, right? You can see in our higher education, we do not see a lot of team teaching or co-teaching happening in the higher education. Although people agree, co-teaching, team teaching should be applicable to any level of education. But like our higher education part, we tend to cooperate more on research, right? But we do not cooperate a lot on teaching. It's our independent area. We tend to think ourselves as the experts in our area. So we'll do our class in our own way, right? You may have several sections, then each professor will have their own way of teaching. Although basically in the end, we hope student could get similar amount of education or similar goal achieved. But that's still very rare. And a lot of research actually shown it's very rare in reality, and also the research in that aspect is also very limited. So the co-teaching in this post-secondary settings is seem to be a little more complicated. This research actually has done a survey in faculty to say, what do you think of co-teaching? Then those faculty members give different answers. They don't have a very consensus on what is co-teaching and what we should do. So although now in higher education, this one is more frequently used in the teacher training program because later they will teach K-12, right? So they will use that method in the K-12 setting. So they train teachers this way, but they don't do it in other schools, especially our business school. We emphasize teamwork because after graduation, basically you are required to work in a team with others. But we don't actually teach students how to do the teamwork with each other. We actually think they should figure it out by themselves, right?
We know that's pretty simple to do.
So
Not that hard.
Yeah, so we assign them teamwork, then we say, okay, you need to do it as a team. But we seldom give them any detailed guidance on how to do it. This co-teaching could really help in that aspect, because your faculty now come together as a team, right, to deliver the content. Your student could observe how you are doing, like how do you learn? How do you cooperate with each other? How do you communicate with each other? How do you solve the conflict? how do you reach a consensus in the end? Then they could use that model in their teamwork and to learn more. So in this way, we hope we could practice what we preach, right? We think we emphasize teamwork, we really do teamwork, we will help you in your teamwork. So that's what we tried in our business school. I think I really like the two quotes. So it's about teamwork. Like Henry Ford say, coming together is beginning, keep together is progress, working together is success. And Michael Jordan says, talent wins games, right? But teamwork and intelligence win championship. So if we really behave like a team, we really build a community, right? For our educators in this university, we could offer more to our students. So here, let's look at what kind of some results in the past, say co-teaching really helps like effective learning. Now, continuous learning is a norm, right, in this society. You need to know how to learn. Then by your teachers coming together to show you the model, right, how they learn as experts or as those experienced learners, you could learn different perspectives. You could learn a little deeper in each aspect because now you have an expert in that aspect. So students could learn their team teaching or this teamwork by first-hand approach. And we could give them right how we listen to each other, how we act as team players, how we behave right in like those professional disagreements, and how we resolve, how we show mutual respect of each other. And by doing this, we try to nurture a dynamic learning environment for students. Actually, that's already established in the literature by saying that co-teaching really helps students' engagement, help them to learn and improve their performance at school, although most of them in those K-12 school, right? So we can see how this will help us in higher education. Another way is you could use that as a professional development program for your faculty. So although we are here to teach, but before going to the teaching career, we do not have a lot of professional training in how to teach, right? We observe like how our professors teach a class. So we try to do it ourselves, and we try to get student feedback. We try to improve during that way. But this co-teaching gives us an opportunity to reflect with your peers to say, okay, what we might have learned right from our co-teacher, then what kind of best practice we could use in our own teaching. In this way, we could improve. So that's a very important way to do the professional development, especially for our new instructors. If we could do that, like an experienced one with a new one, then we could really build a community for learning with each other. So that's why we say we could help build a dynamic learning community. So Anderson in 1991 noted that co-teaching is important in creating a climate in which ideas can be developed and freely exchanged. So, when teachers communicate with each other, you could have this environment to motivate your students to speak freely. Even if they may not feel comfortable speaking with one, they could speak with another one, right? So in this way, we could promote more engagement and communication in class. And we do emphasize, if you need to work together, you need to have the trust. So that the trust, you trust each other, you trust the other, right? Your teammates could do their work and your students could do their work. So this trust could be built by doing this team teaching. Here are two things. We say, okay, we could decrease its transaction costs and complexity by having the trust. It's really a lubricant in the society to have trust. So if you have like a team maybe it's not like easy to teach an existing course, right? But we want to design a course, like new course. We pull together several talents together to design a new course, then this new course will be a very good groundwork for us to build this learning community. Then when we are working together, we co-teach together, we may have opportunity, right, to have more collaboration. Like Todd and I, we are developing this paper based on this co-teaching experience. So we could have more things built in the community. Research question? So we want to implement co-teaching effectively in the business classroom, which is seldom done, like in the reality and in research. So we say, okay, how do we create a dynamic learning community between our professors and students using this co-teaching pedagogy? We've already talked about our motivation, right? Then our experiment.
And I guess a little background on this. I've been doing online stuff for some time. Jim Mahar will know this. I used Trello for several years in business policy, where I would have an online way of working with students. There were some pricing issues with Trello in terms of how much I used it. So what I ended up doing is I started creating a series of workbooks. So for the business policy project, it basically been broken down to 8 different workbooks that teams would work on. They're Google Doc based. So as a result, they have to do certain type of things. I think Bobby's been in my class. Right, Bobby? Yes, you were, Bobby. Oh my God, she's going to really drill me now. But the idea here is that we could actually encourage collaboration and we can measure collaboration at the same time. We could reduce the free rider effect because we were able to see who was being involved in parts of it at the same time. The idea was to move from a black box to a very transparent box, and that was the way that the workbooks were being developed. So I've been working on the workbooks before this, and the other thing to keep in mind too is that COVID hit, and part of what we were doing, we were under a mandate with how we were going to manage things with online classes. So I went to Matricia, our dean, and I said, Matricia, I know we're sort of walking this fine line. So I said, why don't we try something where we're basically doing online one day and we're in person one day? The idea being very simple. If we were able to reduce our contact by 50%, we could reduce COVID rates. And honestly, as somebody who does a lot of contingency planning, I was not worried so much about students getting sick and getting better. I was horrified of losing faculty members in the middle of a semester and having no good way to replace them. That's what I was worried about. So what happened was that actually that summer, the management and marketing departments, we met many, many times, sort of working out this model. You were on sabbatical. That was the reason you were on sabbatical at the time. So he had no idea what John Stevens was. But so we were actually developing these models at that time. And then, of course, because of COVID, but not because we had COVID, the circumstances affected Jing, so she had to be in China for an extended amount of time.
So I could be responsible for the online session. He will be responsible for the face-to-face. That's what the co-teaching will happen. Then we'll on Wednesdays, we'll co-teach together. Sometimes he will be there, I will be there. So we'll.
And it was a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So we use all kinds of tools to facilitate communication between students and faculty. Our outcome is very actually promising. Overall, you can see we had a better performance than this. We done it alone before. So overall, it's a positive, although we do receive some negative voices saying, don't do it together, or there's some messiness in this process. And that's just, so messiness actually is involved in the team working because you need to solve like conflicts, right? You need to come together as a group, so you need to have some negotiation. That's why we have those kind of problems, or students mention that. That's also pointed out actually in the literature. But this way, we could say it's a good way to use technology and also the face-to-face together, so you could build a strong community by using technology and personal interactions. So this dynamic learning opportunity was created out of like because of the contingency arrangement. But it turned out very well. But in terms of our system is the design of credit load, right? And the teaching load evaluation system, we don't continue to do that. But I hope we could do something in the future. We're actually still trying to have a similar syllabus, similar way of instructing our students nowadays.
It did end up that we ended up having very similar courses now, so we do that. The other thing that we did too was after this, well, this was actually prior, right, Jing to COVID.
Yeah.
Jing and I actually worked on the concept of a possible online MBA in China.
China, yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is that both China and we're 12 hours apart. So we actually worked up the concept is that Chinese students, unlike American online MBA students, American online is mostly like asynchronous stuff, meaning basically they can finish at their convenience. We were hypothesizing that Chinese students really would like to have a synchronous experience. So we were actually practicing aspects of this several months prior to that. We were using a program called DingTalk. That's why it's really called DingTalk. And we were actually exercising because we were trying to figure out how to actually create a American university experience for Chinese students without them having to make the major expense of coming to the United States. So we were working on that until what happened, Jing?
Yeah, we tested it with my husband. He hired some students on the other side. Then we tried to say, is it possible to do that? But later, last July, the Chinese government actually had a new policy to say all those tutoring institutions has to be nonprofit. Then all those tutoring institutions in China went into bankruptcy. Yeah, so I'm still in the refunding process of my son's tutoring institution. We paid a large sum of money for the one-to-one using the technology, one-to-one, not face-to-face, one-to-one online instructing for his language class. But later the teacher said, I quit because they now pay me so little, I cannot survive. Then we went to look for the refund. But there are too many parents of filing for a refund. So until now, I filed in November, but still now,
But
I didn't get my
Well,
refund.
but at the time, China had
Because they all
the hottest
United States.
education market in the world in terms of both university connections, but also private companies right there. So yeah, we got but we learned a lot, and I did learn one thing. DingTalk is probably the scariest communication platform you would ever use because DingTalk, they can track you, which I sort of liked. And I've often thought maybe we should start using DingTalk here. I think a lot of our students would like DingTalk because we would track you. But they actually use that in China for that.
Yeah, they took attendance.
Yeah.
They could file your forms over DingTalk. And those K-12, they used DingTalk during COVID. But now they have the face-to-face, so they went back to normal. But every day they still need to report the temperature. You need to do the COVID test every 3 days.
And that's the reason why we are both not the richest people in Beijing right now. So that's the reason I'm so Bonaventure and not lording it over in my
But
private.
buying a new car.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think we have time for, if anybody has any questions, maybe one or two questions before.
Are we doing questions now or are we doing questions at the end?
We do questions now.
So, in special education, when the public laws came out, this whole idea of team teaching was kind of state of the art, where you would have a regular classroom teacher with a special education teacher, and at times you couldn't tell who was who, but in terms of working with the students, so again, but I think it's interesting, the model that you had. So I'm curious, what day of the week was the online part and what day of the week was the in-person?
I would handle Mondays because I'm that kind of guy. So we would do the lectures on Monday. We would do was that right?
Yeah, Wednesday online and also this Friday online.
So we would sort of change it a little bit, but mostly it was Monday and Wednesdays were pretty set. And then Friday sometimes we would use some additional instruction. And sometimes Jing and I were both online.
Yeah.
I think
We
what-
have a lot of times both
yeah,
online.
so a lot of times Jing and I wrote books, so it was really 2 teachers for the price of 1, but you gotta say, most students said, why are we doing? No, it was interesting how we did that. I actually found it pretty freeing myself. I honestly, I really enjoyed working with Jing, and I think that she helped me in areas that I needed assistance in, very timely, you get that kind of person. Of course, I'm a master of bullshit, and she's not quite as good at that as I am.
So you got to do this because of COVID, it was a special circumstance that allowed you to have that be your load to teach
Yeah,
the class together.
it was essentially, I went to our dean, and it was mostly, it was a matter that we were sort of screwed if we couldn't do it, because obviously we didn't want to lose Jing as a teacher and instructor. But it was really a situation where we had to adjust Jing's load. But now that was actually referring to what part of our problem, Mr. Travolta, is that the way we teach is essentially has not been changed since Bonaventure's been in Paris. So how we're compensated, how we're measured, is all like that. So once again, it's sort of interesting. You can do a lot of things in the public schools that we would never be able to do under our economic model at the universities unless it was an extraordinary circumstance.
So at Stritch, we're doing co-teaching for all of our core classes. And the way that's done with load is you sign up for one instructor or the other, and then once both classes make, with enough students, then you can teach that class together. And every one of them is set up that way. We've been doing it since the pandemic started.
So we teach like a block of time.
Yeah, so people are doing it different ways. Some people are teaching it together, they're both there all the time. Some people are, like in the course I'm in, we do 3, 4, 4, and a week together. And, so we're trading off, but we know what the other person's content is, and so we keep referring to that
Yeah.
and trying to tie it together. Some people will do it just plain old half and half, which I don't think is very
Yeah, no,
co-teaching
that's
like.
more- Yeah, it's more like individual.
Yeah.
for some
But you do
classes.
have to have the 2 classes make to,
Jing wouldn't
Yeah,
know.
we will count it like half load for each one.
right?
Jing wouldn't know about this reference, but it was like the Donnie and Marie show. I was she was a little bit country. I was a little bit rock and roll.
Yeah,
I
I
didn't know
know
that's-
Todd being,
None of the kids would know this.
with Donnie Osmond, I'm gonna cut us off before we get into that imagery too much with that. Is that-
I don't know, it's usually.
But I want to thank Todd and Jing for sharing their presentation. And interesting, we got 2 presentations in this session on instruction and teaching. Both are related to team, but kind of from 2 different perspectives. So we had team teaching, and now we've got team test taking. With that, I'll turn things over to John Stevens.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I teach in the school business here in the management department, and actually with Todd and with Jing. And a number of years ago, we came up with the idea of something called team test taking. So let me just kind of answer the first question you're probably wondering about, and that is, when we thought about team test taking, we thought about the idea that the traditional, method of testing assumes that collaboration while you're taking a test is bad. And the fact that, if you're talking during a test, that would be considered cheating. So we kind of thought about, how the process of testing, what the method of testing is all about, which is to determine what someone's level of understanding is of a certain topic. And we thought there's got to be a better way to create tests that both measure the student's ability, but also simulate the real world and address 3 or 4 other issues. So let me start by asking the question, has anybody here done team test taking? Okay, you've taken a course from me, right? Have you did a course in team test taking, or you've taken a course?
Or I just did a course that had it.
Okay, have you taught a course, or, okay, how did you do that?
They took the test on their own at first, and then the next score that they got was working with the group to go through their previous answers.
And did you combine the 2
And
scores?
then combine the 2 scores.
Okay, very good. That's an interesting approach, and we thought about that. What we kind of did was we kind of looked at the idea of team test taking, and this started back in the 1990s. Chuck Walker, one of the professors here, started doing team test taking, And I started looking at it in 2008, started modifying it and implementing it. And then in 2017, started doing some assessments of students to see what they liked or didn't like about team test taking. So overall, the version that we did was, it's a two-person test where the students are randomly partnered up, and both of them put their names on their tests, but they're taking the test as individuals. We give them a few minutes at the beginning of the test to look over the test individually in what we call quiet time, and then they have the remainder of the class to discuss with their partner the tests, go through the questions and so forth. More recently, we've been doing the tests using Moodle, so it's an electronic test that they're calling up in the classroom. And when they're done taking the test, they just hit submit and they're done. They can leave the room at that point if they like. But they're two people taking the test individually, but they can talk with each other. So in other words, they don't have to agree on what their answers are to a particular test. It's not a collaborative answer, but it's a collaborative process in the learning during the test. So the rules are these. When we start the process, we randomly assign the students, and I've done randomly assigning as simply as saying, everyone line up across the back of the room. People born in January here and in December there, and they line up in intervening months or whatever, and then we just count off by the numbers. If there's 30 kids in the class, they count off by 15s, and that's how they're randomly assigned. They can only talk with their partner. The students are given the option to take the test alone, and occasionally each semester one student will say, yeah, I just want to take it by myself. You recall, Talia, when you were in the class, did anybody take it by themselves?
Yeah, Mary.
Yeah, there was one student. Okay. Most of them like to take it in teams. They can select different essay questions. I usually have 30 to 35 multiple choice, and usually 3 or 4 essay questions, and they pick 1 or 2, but the students do not have to pick the same essay question in teams. They can take 2 different essays, but they can talk about the answers to the essay questions. And then they can decide how they want to take the test as a team. They can either do it question by question, where I would say, what'd you get for question 1? What'd you get for question 2? Or they can say, let's do 5 questions in a row and see which ones we want to talk about. Or in some cases, they say, you do the whole multiple choice by yourself, I'll do it by myself. Then when we get done, we'll just go back and talk about the questions that we want to discuss a little bit. So our assumption was, the reason why we thought this was a good idea was you always hear a lot, at least recently, about the amount of stress that tests cause for students. And so we thought taking a team test would reduce stress both before and during the test. We also thought that there'd be some learning that would take place, God forbid, during a test, where instead of the students just being measured on their memory, they could actually talk with each other during the test and determine, if by conversation, whether they could think through the answer to a particular question. We also postulated that it would reduce cheating, and we'll show you the results of that in a minute. And we also thought it would kind of provide more of a real world kind of collaborative approach to doing the tests. In the real world, if I have a problem and I can't solve it, I might say, hey, Mike, can you help me with this? I'm not, in a business, I'm not required to solve the answer necessarily all by myself. So we started with a survey to find out what students thought of this in 2017. These were the components of the survey. There's about 22 questions, 18 of which were Likert. And then when we went through, there was 2 tests, or 2 classes, I should say, that actually we did the team test in. One was an undergraduate course called Management 301, which all business students take here. The other one was an MBA class, which is MBA 613, which is organizational behavior. So I'm going to give you 2 sets of results. One is the results of the assessments we did leading up to 2020, and then one we just did this past semester. So we asked the question, what was the impact on learning by you taking a test in teams? And 90% of the students said that they thought the team approach was a good way for them to be measured in terms of their learning. Only 10% thought there was no additional learning during the discussions they had as a team. We had similar results in the assessments that we did in just this past couple of weeks ago. When we asked the question about stress, we said, how much stress that was impacted by taking the test in teams. 89% said it reduced the amount of stress that they had before taking the test. And 95% said it reduced the amount of stress during the test to have someone they could turn to and talk to and ask questions of in terms of what they thought the correct answer was. And we saw similar results for the assessment we just did the last couple of weeks ago as well. So there seems to be a pretty much consensus that it reduces the stress before and during the test, which we think is a positive. In terms of understanding, 94% of the students indicated they thought the team approach was a good way to assess their understanding of the material. Only 17 out of the 272 that we surveyed during the 3-year period or 4-year period I was talking about thought that it wasn't a good way to assess their understanding. And more recently, we saw similar results. 88% thought it was a great way to assess their understanding. Only 6 of 48 thought it wasn't as good or there wasn't any improvement in terms of assessing their understanding. Now, here's the interesting thing on cheating. Do you think that the team test taking would increase or decrease the amount of cheating people would do? How many people think it would increase the cheating?
This is a trick question.
Well, it all depends on how you define cheating. If you think of cheating as I'm talking to somebody or I'm looking at somebody's paper, yeah, but we kind of did away with that whole concept. And we said, you can even see what the other person's putting on their test if you want. You don't have to put that answer on your test, though. You get to put whatever answer you want on your test. And 96% of the kids said they were less likely to cheat within the context of how we set the team test up. Only 4% said they were more likely, and 55% said it made it more difficult to cheat because typically when we ask questions like, do you like other people to know when you're cheating? People typically say, no, I don't want other people to know I'm a cheater. Well, if you're sitting there next to somebody and you're collaborating and you're pulling out notes or doing something, they can see what you're doing. So it makes it a little more challenging to cheat in this particular instance. We saw similar results when we just did the assessment just recently. 94% said they thought that it made them less likely to cheat. And 92% said they thought it made them more difficult for them to cheat. And we asked for some comments, from students about the team test approach. And basically, one of the things they said was, well, we'd like to be paired up with our partners before the test. And we thought about that and thought that's not a good idea. Because then it'd be like you do chapter 1, 2, and 3, and I'll study chapter 4, 5, and 6. So that's not a good. So what we did was, because we do it randomly right before the test, they have to study all the material. Also, students said they wanted a little quiet time before the test started where they could start talking. So we implemented that as one of the suggestions from the students. We asked students more recently for some more comments, and this is what they said. I thought that one was pretty interesting. It makes you focus more on the material than on the test itself. And they also said that they were studying more because they wanted to do well, didn't want to look bad with their partner, and in a sense, were not only helping themselves, but their partner as well. So for the future, we would suggest, for additional research, we could think more about strategies that students use in taking the team test. There's different ways we talked about. Should we actually suggest a strategy for the students to use in the team test? And we're also looking at how to do this online. We've done some research on that as well. Do I have time to go over that? Okay. Let me stop just for a minute and see what questions you have, because I've got some more I can show you depending.
Were they able to use any resources like their computer, Google, so it was just back and forth?
No,
So any information they had to have upstairs?
That's right. I would say take out your cell phone and put it on the desk in front of you face down. And we would say, you're not allowed to be Googling things while you're taking the test. Now, I didn't use any of that software that we have available to lock the computers down so they couldn't do that, but I've heard that's somewhat problematic anyways. And so I would just walk around the room. But again, if I was taking the test with Khalid, if I started going in and Googling the answers, he could see me doing that. So he kind of labeled me a cheater, whether I wanted to be called that or not. And what we kind of felt was that students were not as inclined to do it if they thought someone else was going to see them doing it. Carol and then Tanya.
John, I thought this was super interesting and I appreciate you presenting it. One question I would have if I was a reviewer looking at this is you talked about the students' perceived stress levels and you said less or equal to. And I would want you to break that out because if they're feeling the same level of stress they felt before, then it's not as persuasive as if it's less.
And I think, as I recall the numbers, I think we said like 94% said it was less stressful beforehand or equal to, and I think it was probably in the area of 60 or 70% said it was less, and about 10% or 15%
And see, I would
said it
report
was equal.
that,
That's
because
a
I
good
think
point.
that that's a little
Yes.
bit more persuasive, because if it's less or equal, it might be, oh, well, it was equal for the majority of it.
Right. That's a good point. Thank you.
I was gonna ask if you had any problems with, try to remember. You said that, okay, come back to me.
Okay. It's interesting because Talia was one of my students who actually did this, so we can maybe ask her in a minute what she thought about
Oh,
it.
wait, I remember.
Oh, okay.
One of your things was that people are more likely to study, more to like make themselves look better and help their partner. Have you found any problems with people studying less because they're like, oh, I'll just depend upon
That's-
my, like, because I've like experienced that maybe, so.
Well, no, that's a really good point. And what we've said is, and then maybe you experienced it in the class, was we said to students, it's not your responsibility as a partner to help your partner get through the test. So if Talia and I were taking the test and I didn't study, and I kept saying to Talia, what do you think the answer to one is? What do you think it is to two? Eventually she'd turn to me and say, it's not my job to get you through the test. You're on your own. I'm going to do the test. You're going to get your own results. And I've heard students tell me that they've done that. I've seen it in class where someone said, oh, I'm not going to study, I'm going to have a partner. And then they wind up with the partner saying, I'm not giving you the answers, it's not my job. So that's a really good question.
Yeah, the question is here, in education, we mostly stress the individual result. So when they go outside in the job market, people, they say, what is your teammate? Can he answer on your behalf? Okay, so a good experimentation to test the effectiveness of so you do, for example, one test group and one test individual in the same semester and see what is the result of the performance or the performance of the same member of the team, whether they did it on their own or they did it with the team. And then you have like comparison that
Yeah.
you can.
And that kind of implies, the question, is that the only grade they get, which is not true, because in our courses, I have the students do chapter quizzes.
Yeah.
So they do individual chapter quizzes, not the partner, they do individual chapter quizzes for all the different chapters.
Yeah.
And Talia remembers that for the
In
MBA
class?
course. Pardon me?
In class,
No, they do it outside of class, but they do it as individuals.
and
And then-
the team test in class.
Huh?
And the team test.
The team test is in class.
Yeah, so that's what I meant.
Yeah.
So to be able to compare, because quizzes outside, they can, but
Well, I'm
with
just,
the same
yeah,
conditions.
the point I'm making is that the team test is not the only grade. They also write research papers. They also do case presentations. So, but I look at things a little differently maybe. And I think about the idea that in the real world, we've got to teach people to work with each other, not to be competing with each other. So if I'm in the real world, I don't know the answer to something, I should go to somebody and talk to them. Now, I will clarify one other thing too. If you're an instructor, you might want to think about, is your particular class that you're teaching suited for a team test taking? For example, if you're teaching someone biology who's going to become a doctor, during an operation, you can't have somebody say, I don't know what to do here, call another doctor. So there are certain kinds of tests. It might be accounting tests where you have to do formulations and do all kinds of things where if you have to apply a formula, it'd be kind of tough to do that in a team test, I would think. So this isn't the ideal for everybody. Okay?
But John, I mean, this is like formative testing. I mean, some people do open book tests,
Yes.
open notes tests.
Yes.
So it's not a situation where you, once again, they don't have access to the information. It's really, I guess, are they actually collaborating, that they are adding their retention and understanding?
Right.
Which I think is the important thing here, which, one thing I thought when you're talking about, I always wondered, I know you always use random groups, but I've always thought about, gee, if you had two people studying together and they knew who they were and they realized they had to rely on each other. I don't know, I think it's very intriguing, but I think we see a lot of variations of this. It's just, yours is a little different, but, open book test is something that people can use or abuse too.
Well, and ultimately, if someone is thinking about doing a team test, don't necessarily do it just the way I do it. Use this as a framework and say, how can I tweak it and make it work for me? I like the way we do it because of the results we've had, because of the surveys we've done, because we've talked about it in class in terms of what students, like about it and what we think the impact is. Go ahead.
We do have about 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes?
I wanted to say, I do think that the team test taking is so much more practical and sort of relevant, especially with, I know some of the projects that Palmer and I do, just getting people to talk to each other and like asking for help, especially in some of the underclassmen, which we've definitely experienced that a little bit, is so relevant to try and get people to just talk to each other again.
Yeah, because so many times the kids on the phones are texting, but they're not talking with each other.
Building on what Bobby says, I see a very real problem with people not getting together to study.
Yeah.
So I often wonder, it's like we have more collaborative opportunities to study than ever in human history. But you still see people, they're bulldogging it till the test itself. And I cannot figure out why people don't try to collaborate.
Yeah.
So maybe creating more collaborative activities like this, enforcing collaboration, it might actually be something that may
Well,
be a good model.
Let me just share.
Long enough, do we have like, I don't know, major field exam or anything that shows that it has improved longer term retention?
I don't have any idea how we do the major field exam here anymore. But I wanted to share one last thing with you, because I just have a couple minutes left. And that's the idea of online team test taking. And again, this is a new area. We've only started to get into this. And this is where 2 students would be identified right before a test. They would go into something like a Zoom room, like either a chat room or something like that. They could see each other, and then they also would have their test brought up in a Moodle format. And the technology would have to be there to do this. I'm not sure that it would be a problem, but I don't know if what we have right now is ideal. And the reason we think this would be a good idea is, again, there's less inclination to cheat. Typically, if you're taking a test with somebody else, it reduces the stress. There's an emphasis on the collaboration, which you're saying doesn't really occur as much as it used to, I think. It makes the test interactive when you're talking with somebody else. So hopefully there's some cognitive things going on rather than just memory recall. It accommodates the online environment. And we think it would relate to the real world in terms of what we're trying to teach students to do, which is to work with other students and in the real world, work with other employees when they get a job. So I don't know how much time I have left.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Any other questions?
About 2 minutes more.
Okay, then I'll just finish. This is the thing I want to leave you with then. If you do think this is a good idea, you need to decide if team test taking, whether it's online or in the classroom, is a good idea. If it's appropriate for you, you want to talk to your class about it. You want to make sure you have the software. We use Moodle here for the testing. You want to create your test using multiple choice and essay. And when you do the multiple choice, you want to do it so that there's a degree of thinking that has to go into the answer rather than it just being something you can Google. Like if you say, what's Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Well, they can Google that. If you say, apply one of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to one of these items, now they have to do an application process. So they really have to start talking to each other to figure out how to apply it, not just how to remember what it is. And then we always consider surveying your students afterwards if you do this to see what they think, see if they liked it, see if they have any suggestions for a better way of doing it. How's that?
Real quick, John, I'll say this too. Jing and I use the online formative testing you see in most textbooks. I think what you're seeing now is that you're seeing Chegg, but it's just catching up with it. The idea behind online testing, like that formative testing, is well, you can go back and look at your textbook as many times as you need, take it again. But what I'm seeing now, the results this year, I'm seeing more people getting it perfect on the first time. which only suggests to me is that it's saying, oh, I could take the time to go back and take it again, but gee, wouldn't it be a lot more fun just to finish it up and get it, so it's sort of, I would say it's getting more apparent. So I think that honestly, that's the whole time the formative online testing, like we're doing right now, may be at its end. Because I just think, too many ways around it.
Well, just to leave you with this thought, if anyone would like to see this PowerPoint, if you send me an email here, I'd be glad to send you a copy of the PowerPoint, and be happy to talk with anyone, in the future about your experiences doing this or your thoughts on it and suggestions as well, because I don't have this down to a science. There's only one other faculty member here in the School of Business, I believe, who does team test taking, and that's Grace in the accounting department. So she does it as well. And I've been kind of preaching this to the other faculty members, but I haven't had a lot of takers. And I think it's because it's a little out there, it's like, I don't know if I want to do that or not, but it's something to consider.
What if you have an odd number?
That's a great question. If we have an odd number, when we go around the room, there's one person left, and I say, Mike, you're the last one. You can go sit with whoever you want. You're going to be the third person in the group. So it'll be one group of three.
So sit at the end.
And so Mike will say, oh, that's two of my buddies are over there. I'm going to go sit with them.
It'd be interesting to see someone sizing up the room and decide,
Yeah.
do I go with my friends or do I go with the?
Who's the smartest one in the class?
Yeah.
But that's how we handle the odd one.
Well, thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Tom and Jing also.
Yes.
Great presentations. Thanks to everybody. And we're just about right on time, I think, the transition.